Now, I've made this mistake several times in the past, so I know the consequences of doing this. I didn't necessarily... What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having an awesome day. It is Friday, August 15th here in South Georgia, and on today's video we're going to talk about doing too much and the consequences of doing too much. So as I'll show you in a minute, we've got several different veggies growing in our garden right now that really don't do well when you feed them too much. And I had someone emailing me the other day talking about their cow peas they grew. Said they grew up some beautiful cow peas, but they never really made any peas, and that was because they fed them too much. So I thought this would be a great video topic, considering some of the things that we have growing in our garden right now that probably a lot of other people also have growing in their gardens as well. So first, let's talk about cow peas, which is a really good veggie to plant in the mid to late summer here in the deep south because they don't mind the heat. And as I told you several weeks ago, we were going all in on cow peas this year. Let's go see what we've got going on. Now just ignore all the weeds here. I got to get out here this weekend and get things cleaned up. But this is the first little patch of cow peas we planted. This is the Chack Bay variety that we like to grow every year. So these were planted about 2.5–3 weeks ago. Really good germination. Had to thin them out a little bit as I planted them too thick. We've got 5 rows looking really good right now. If you're curious about the planting density on these, you could probably have them thicker than this. I like to thin mine out to, I don't know, we got to plant every 3 inches or so there. You can plant them really thick, you can thin them out. This is just the way I like to do it. Then about a week and a half after I planted those Chack Bay cow peas, I planted these Tennessee purple peas right here. 3 rows of those, and you can see those have came up very nicely well. Haven't thinned these out yet, and I didn't drop as many seeds with these. I went overboard with the Chack Bay, so maybe just a little bit of thinning necessary here and should be good to go. We will need to put up a trellis for these because this is a climbing variety. And then shortly after I planted the Tennessee purple peas, I planted 3 rows of these Ozark Razorback peas here where my tomatoes were in the spring and early summer. Once again, yes, we do need to clean this up a little bit, and we've got mushrooms popping up all over the place in this plot here. But looks like we're going to have a good stand of these as well. Might not have to thin these at all. We will need to put up a trellis for these. This is another kind of more vertical variety, so we'll trellis these so they can climb. But just awesome looking stand of peas here too. And then lastly here, back to this plot that has the Chack Bay peas over there. In these 2 rows where we had some kind of mid to late summer cucumbers, I pulled those out and planted 2 double rows of zipper peas. Went to the feed and seed store and they scraped the bottom of the bucket. I got all they had left. And you can see they're just starting to pop through there because I didn't want to move my drip tape. I just wanted to keep these 2 rows where they were, and it's about 4 or 5 foot apart. I went ahead and planted double rows here as opposed to the single rows we did with the other variety. So looks like we're going to have a good stand of zipper peas as well. So I couldn't be happier with how my cow peas germinated and how they're looking right now. Looks like if everything goes as planned, we should have a really nice harvest in the fall, be able to put some in the freezer and also save some seed. But anyways, back to the theme of this video, which is doing too much with those cow peas. If we do too much, we're just going to grow leaf after leaf after leaf and might not get a lot of pods. So because cow peas are legumes, they're going to fix their own nitrogen. We don't really have to supplement them with nitrogen as long as we have that bacteria in the soil that helps them fix their own nitrogen. They're usually good to go. Now, as I told you on that last cow pea video we did, when you're planting, it doesn't hurt to put down a little balanced pre-plant fertilizer. Definitely don't overdo it, but it doesn't hurt to put a little bit down. And a couple of those plots I could have got away with not putting any down. I just do it because I have it on hand and it makes me feel better. So we just put a little bit of this coop grow along the row when we plant there. gives them some just basic nutrients to help get them going, but we don't feed them anymore after that because there are consequences of doing so. Furthermore, I probably wouldn't want to plant cowpeas in a plot that had just been grazed by my chickens or that had been grazed by my chickens in the last couple of months. We can plant some stuff behind those chickens, things that like a good bit of nitrogen, but we wouldn't want to plant cowpeas behind those chickens because we just grow some beautiful plants, but we probably wouldn't get a lot of peas. So think about that as well, not just abstaining from adding fertilizer as they grow, but think about, okay, is this a plot where I just dumped a bunch of chicken manure in the last couple months? If so, it might not be the greatest spot for cowpeas. So kind of think about what kind of nutrients you may still have hanging around in that plot before you plant your cowpeas. They're going to do better in a spot that's just not loaded up with nitrogen. Okay, so we talked about cowpeas. Now, second on our list of things that don't like it when you do too much would be sweet potatoes. So here's our sweet potatoes. We actually have 3 elevated rows planted here. Really can't tell right now, just looks like one merged mass of sweet potato vines. Probably do need to rake some of these back here a little bit so they don't get into my Tennessee purple peas so much. But anyways, our sweet potato vines themselves are looking really, really good. But beware, because you can have some really good looking sweet potato vines and come harvest time, you can be really, really disappointed. So if you fed those sweet potato plants with too much nitrogen, or you had too much nitrogen in your soil, you're going to grow some really lush, great looking sweet potato vines, but you might not make a whole lot of sweet potatoes, or you might not make some very big sweet potatoes. Now, I've made this mistake several times in the past, so I know the consequences of doing this. I didn't necessarily give my sweet potato plants a lot of nitrogen as they grew, but I planted them in a spot that probably had a little too much excess nitrogen in the soil there, and come harvest time, what I ended up with was a bunch of long, skinny sweet potatoes. They just don't plump up if you've got too much nitrogen in the soil. So if you've ever seen that, there are several things that can cause those long, skinny sweet potatoes, but too much nitrogen is one of them. So you want to be really, really careful when you're feeding sweet potatoes not to go too heavy on the nitrogen. Now, me personally, with those sweet potatoes you saw earlier, I put down a little bit of this when I planted, and then I put down a little more once those plants started bushing out a little bit, and I healed those mounds. I fed them one more time. And that's probably all I'm going to feed them. Now, you will see different programs or fertilizer schedules out there for sweet potatoes that recommend giving some excess phosphorus and potassium, and that can work, but I would have a soil test before I did that to see that you were deficient in phosphorus or potassium before you go really overloading one of those. So I think just some basic balanced fertilizer at planting and at the first hilling is a good, safe way to do it. Not saying that's the optimal way to do it, but if you just keep some of this on hand like I do, that's a good, safe way to do it to make sure you're not feeding them too much. Okay, so we talked about cowpeas, we talked about sweet potatoes. The next thing on our list that doesn't like it when you do too much would be okra. So here's our okra that we have growing right now. Didn't plant a ton this year, just planted this little 4x6 raised bed. But you can actually grow a lot of okra in a 4x6 raised bed. So we've got this dwarf cowhorn variety growing here. We have pruned it a little bit as it grows, just to keep it more manageable, not letting it bush out as much. About time to harvest this again. Those pods have gotten pretty long, but most of them are still going to be tender at that length with this variety. And you may look at some of these plants and think, well, those leaves look a little pale or don't look that great, but I'm really not caring about how the leaves are looking with this okra here. As long as I'm getting consistent pod production, hey, let's go. So what can happen if you feed okra too much is it can delay your maturity date, or delay the date at which you start seeing flowers and subsequently seeing pods. Now, it has been my experience that some of the newer hybrid okra varieties can tolerate more feeding than some of these older heirloom varieties like the dwarf cowhorn. You feed that one too much, you'll just get leaves and leaves and leaves. The plant will just grow and the pod production will be delayed. And to kind of give you an idea of what's happening in layman's terms, basically those plants are having to burn through all those excess nutrients in the soil there before they start producing pod. So they're just making leaves and leaves and leaves, and then once they kind of burn through all that excess, that's when you'll start seeing the flowers and the okra that you want to eat. Now it is important to note here, let's say those okra plants in that raised bed there in the next 3 or 4 weeks started looking pretty dang pitiful. I might go out there and sprinkle some balanced fertilizer, some of that coop grow, on the soil there, give them a little bit, but I definitely don't want to overdo it. So we just kind of keep an eye on them. You know, those plants are hopefully going to keep producing for us all the way to the end of November, so we still got a long ways to go with those. If they start looking really rough, not going to hurt to feed them a little bit. We just don't want to overload them on the nitrogen, so we, reduce our pod production. And the last one we'll talk about is tomatoes. Now this plant I'm about to show you, I kind of told you the story of that plant several videos ago, but maybe not everyone saw that, and since it's very pertinent to this video, I figured I'd mention it again. So this garden peach tomato plant here was planted way back in the spring, and we ended up over fertilizing it. It was struggling in the beginning, and we probably gave it a little too much fertilizer as we were trying to get it out of that funk. So what happened is this plant just grew and grew and grew and got huge, but had no tomatoes on it. Now recently it's loaded up pretty good for us, but for the longest time didn't even see any blooms on this tomato plant, just a bunch of leaves. I wouldn't say this plant is looking rough, but it's definitely not looking as good as it once was, so it could probably stand another feeding right now. But the fact that we fed it too much in the beginning delayed our flower and fruit production, gave us a big beautiful plant, just no tomatoes. Kind of had to burn through all that stuff before we started getting those tomatoes. Now that I think we're back more towards a normal level as far as the nutrients in the soil here, we might could just spoon feed a little bit, keep it going into the fall. Now down here in the deep south where we have a long warm growing season, that mistake is not that costly, and it actually ended up working out perfectly for us because we have tomatoes now when we shouldn't have tomatoes now. All our other tomato plants are long gone. They were toast over a month ago. So that ended up working out just fine for us. But let's say you were in a northern climate with a limited warm growing season, or maybe you were in a southern climate and planting some fall tomatoes. Once again, a limited window there. So if you were to over fertilize those tomatoes with a limited window in front of you, that could be problematic. You just have a bunch of big bushy tomato plants in your garden and not a whole lot of tomatoes to eat, if any. And that's why we always talk about spoon feeding as being the best option for tomatoes and even peppers. Going with a lower dosage or lower concentration, higher frequency. Not only is that just what those plants like, but it's also going to keep you from giving them too much at one time. So those are some very specific examples of what can happen with certain veggies that we have in our garden this time of year when you do too much. Now there are also other consequences of doing too much. There's a lot of consequences for your soil if you do too much. So if you do too much on a consistent basis, you can create some nutrient imbalances. If you're using a lot of synthetic fertilizer, you can create some salt buildups. You can create some pH issues. You could damage your microbial community in your soil. Lots of things can happen if you do too much. Now I'm a big believer in feeding the plants in my garden. I think most gardeners under fertilize as opposed to over fertilize, but very important to know the consequences of over fertilizing, especially on these crops we mentioned today. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and if you've got any good over fertilization stories from gardens past, please do share those in the comments below. And if you want to know more about just our basic simple fertilizer regime around here, watch this video right here. We'll break it down and tell you why there's pretty much only 2 types of fertilizer we use. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.